that, we are opening the public hearing on House Bill 1614 and start with the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chairs and Committee. Peter Clodfelter, staff of the committee. House Bill 1614 concerns the home cultivation of cannabis, and the bill would authorize adults age 21 and over to produce up to 6 cannabis plants on the premises of their housing unit, subject to production and possession limits and restrictions and conditions in the bill. There would be a 15-plant limit per housing unit, so if there are multiple adults seeking to use the 6-plant authorization, there would be a 15-plant limit, and there's also some requirements about marking plants and certain cannabis from the plants with the person's name and their address and date of birth. The bill would also establish Class 3 civil infractions related to plants or cannabis from the plants being visible within the ordinary public view or readily smelled. There would also be Class 1 civil infractions established by the bill related to the unsafe storage of homegrown cannabis if a minor obtains access in certain circumstances. The bill would prohibit home grows by family daycare providers as well as by foster family homes. It would also expressly retain the right of landlords to prohibit home grows through the terms of a rental agreement, and it would modify the real property forfeiture statute as applies to cannabis. The last thing I'll note is about enforcement, and the bill's expressly prohibits investigation and enforcement of the proposed home grow requirements by the Liquor and Cannabis Board in general, except for an exception for mutual law enforcement assistance that could be requested by a law enforcement agency. And that concludes the staff report, Madam Chairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any question? Representative Reeves.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that detailed presentation. Peter, can you highlight for me whether or not this bill includes any potential federal preemption clauses, conversation around mortgage or deeds related to home ownership and the impact relative to potential insurance, banking, or other aspects related to home ownership that we might need to be taking into consideration?
Thank you for the question, Rep. Reeves. It does not get into that. Just say no. I mean, the one thing it talks about with the property ownership is just the right of landlords to prohibit people who rent from them from doing home grows in the property. So it doesn't really address aspects of home ownership in this context, other than that renting issue.
Follow-up, Representative Reeves.
So the word lease is not included in this language, correct?
Well, it does address leases.
Okay.
So, that's the issue it does address. I mean, it says landlords could continue, if the bill passed, a landlord could still prohibit a home grow in their property that they're renting out if it's in the lease, if that's in the lease agreement. Yep.
Thank you. And we have our prime sponsor here, Co-Chair Klova.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. It is my delight to be with you and have some time to talk to you about this little bill. My name is Representative Shelley Kloba, and I represent the 1st Legislative District. The basic premise under this bill is that cannabis is a plant, and you can buy products made from it in a store. And so making it illegal to grow it at home seems just not logical. Now, we were one of the first to legalize, and we did not have a provision for growing at home other than on the medical side of things. Most of the states that legalized after us, whether it was within their medical or within their recreational adult use, there's 17 states that allow it, anywhere ranging between South Dakota allows 3 plants, Michigan allows 12, most of them allow 6. And so I do appreciate some of the concerns that we've heard over the years, which is why we have the restrictions on not in a daycare or foster setting. This bill is really taking into account youth access. Obviously, that is something we want to avoid. And so the things that are new in this bill as opposed to previous iterations of it are the civil penalties that come along with it. And they're modeled after the ones that we have in place for if someone gets access to a firearm that you have. So it gives a measure of responsibility that the owner of the plants has. And so I think that that's an important new piece of it. The plant limits at 6, I think, are important because this is very much about personal use. We're not creating little black market or illicit market gardens anywhere. This is not a sort of commercially sustainable number of plants. And so the principles that I care very much about are, the keeping away from youth, as well as having people who are growing them take some serious personal responsibility to lock them up, put them in, or make sure that the products and the plants are not accessible to youth. So I looked very hard, Representative Reeves, after you had that conversation with me about what does it do with mortgages or homeowners insurance or those kinds of very thoughtful, deep questions you've asked, and I have not been able to find anything. And it surprises me, actually, because with 17 states who allow it, I would have thought that something would have come. We would see a trend of some sort where that's enough homeowners, for instance, that if that was a problem, I think the homeowners insurance companies would have jumped right on it. So I know that doesn't give you exactly what you were looking for, but I did want to try to address that. So I'm going to conclude now. We have a lot of people who want to speak, and I don't want to stand in their way.
Very quick question.
Yes, Madam Chair. So, Representative Kloba, thank you for this legislation. It has been brought to my attention that there is some concern in home appraisal processes that if photos are taken that may include this product, that it may cause some challenges for home appraisals and then for federal preemption because it is still an illegal activity at the federal level. Can you speak a little bit about, A, whether or not you'd be open to amendments to address that in this bill, or if you have thoughts or suggestions on how we might address that issue?
I really appreciate that very deep thought. Again, I think with the 17 states, I haven't seen that. I'm very interested in exploring that with you because I don't want that to be a problem. I think when a person's getting their home appraised, they have some control over whether or not they're showing things. However, I am open to amendment, and so let's have a conversation offline. I'd love to hear suggestions and work with you on that.
Thank you. We're going to be hearing this bill until 9:30. Let's let 9:20. I'm sorry. Please begin.
We have 19 witnesses.
There are 19 people signed up to testify, and I want to remind people that they can submit written testimony.
I'll let you down however long you want to set the timer.
Co-Chair Stearns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 19 witnesses signed in to testify, and we will start off with a panel of Kevin Oliver, Burl Bryson, and John Kingsbury, and they will be followed by a remote panel of Mr. Antonio McAfee, Leslie LeDuc, and Scott McKinnon.
Please begin. First person up, begin.
All right, I'm going to heavily edit here. My name is John Kingsbury. I'm a native Washingtonian. Thank you for bringing this bill up. I've heard a lot of concerns while refining these bills over the years, and it seems adventurous and risky to us, home growing. But again, as Representative Kloba stated, this is a well-worn path. This is not an experiment. We know what the effects of this are. We know that this does not increase crime. We know that this does not increase youth use. I've also heard the concern that if we legalize home grows, that it will hurt regulated sales. But that hasn't been the case in Colorado. Colorado allows home growing. They also have generous medical limits, and they have a higher per capita sales than us. Sorry. Did you all hear that? Okay. So we know what the effects are, and they're not negative. And what I want to really stress here is that people grow not because it makes economic sense, but because they love growing. And it's an interesting plant, and I think there are really the guardrails on this bill. If you look through all of the guardrails that are here, I think it's time to sort of step up and join the other states because they've already conducted the experiment for us. Thank you.
Next, please.
Hi, thank you, Chair Wiley and Chair Kloba, ranking member in the committee, for the opportunity to testify. For the record, my name is Burl Bryson. I'm the Executive Director of the Cannabis Alliance, and we're dedicated to the advancement of a vital, ethical, equitable, and sustainable cannabis industry in Washington, and we would like to ask you to advance this bill. We're very much in favor of it. It's been a long time, 10 years of cannabis legalization in Washington, and yet this state has left Homegrow and the ability to homegrow behind. I specifically want to address the social equity aspects of this particular issue. As we know, people of color are much more likely to be prosecuted and to be charged with cannabis crimes. And so continuing to felonize homegrow in the state of Washington, simply growing 1 or 2 plants at home can result in a felony charge and prosecution. And this is more likely to fall on people of color than anything else. So just from a social equity perspective, this is a really important bill, but I think it's been proven in other states that the harms that are anticipated from homegrow have simply not materialized, and it's time for Washington to catch up with the rest of the states in this nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is Mr. Kingsbury?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, then Mr. Oliver. No, Mr. Oliver. Okay. We'll go online to the remote testimony of...
Mr. Vice Chair, sorry to interrupt. I believe Mr. Oliver may be online, if that's correct.
Okay, great. Sorry. Thank you, Peter. Mr. Oliver, thank you.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, hello. My name is Kevin Oliver. I'd like to thank the committee for this hearing. I'm a member of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. We're a proud sponsor of I-502. Several of our committee members have spent millions of dollars of their own money to promote the civil liberties of marijuana consumers around the nation. We don't promote marijuana use per se. I would like to address, while I support Homegrow, the issue of youth usage from 4 objective studies last year. I will submit this to the full committee for your perusal. Following the enactment of medical cannabis access laws and adult use marijuana laws, there has not been a significant rise in self-reported marijuana use by adolescents. That's according to the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, the National Center for Education, the Journal of American Medical Associations, and that's JAMA, and the U.S. National Institute on Drug Abuse. In regards to kids' exposure to marijuana, I was also a licensed producer processor of a Tier 3 for 6 years, and the LCB saw it in our best interest to allow children on the farm in full view of thousands and thousands of pounds of marijuana. I will submit the rest of my time to the next testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So we'll go to Mr. Antonio McAfee, Ms. Leslie LeDuc, and Mr. Scott McKinnon.
Mr. Vice Chair, it appears none of those testifiers are in the hearing room on Zoom in the moment, so it might be okay to move on to the next.
Thank you. In that case, Madam Chair, we will go to Mr. Ryan Caitlin and Caitlin Ryan, thank you, and Mr. Joel Jensen. And it may be that there are 2 Joel Jensens, or is there just one? Or perhaps none. Okay. In that case, Mr. Micah Sherman, if you could come up too.
Please begin when you reach the seat, whoever gets there first, because we're running out of time.
Sounds good. Thank you, committee, and thank you, Chairs Wiley and Kloba. For the record, my name is Caitlin Ryan, and I'm a board member with the Cannabis Alliance, part owner of a Tier 3 producer processor, but I am here to testify in support of this bill as a mother of 4. My kids are 19, 15, 13, and 10, and we talk about my work as a matter of regular family conversation, and in preparation for today's testimony was dinner conversation last night. First, I would like to address the concerns regarding youth access to a growing plant. The cannabis flower is not psychoactive. As my 10-year-old said last night, you have to do a bunch of stuff to it, right? And I told him, yep, very broadly, it's like turning a cucumber into a pickle, but then you have to also light the pickle on fire to enjoy the zing of the vinegar. And he thought that sounded terrible. Wet cannabis needs to go through a process of drying and curing before it can be combusted, the delta part of delta-9, or heated to burn off carboxyls, making hydroxy-11 the psychoactive component in edibles. Curing cannabis, just like canning vegetables, is a process that takes practice. It is an enthusiast's pursuit. As a green plant, cannabis is safe from accidental dosing, and this bill goes further to ensure discretion and safety with parameters prohibiting visibility and smell. This bill also gives a directive for safe storage, holding adults accountable for folks under 21 who are not able to access the homegrown cannabis. Washington is one of the only adult use states that does not allow for home grow, and far beyond any other adult use state, it is a felony to unlawfully grow a plant. As we near closer to federalization, it is time we come more in alignment with the rest of the country, and it is past time to stop criminalizing mundane single-user cannabis activity. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Please begin.
Hello. Thanks again. My name is Micah Sherman. I'm with the Washington Sun and Craft Growers Association, and we're here to encourage support for HB 1614. I also am here today as the co-author of a book called Grow Your Own, Understanding, Cultivating, and Enjoying Marijuana. Sold 15,000 copies. It's a lovely book, and this bill is obviously right in line with the spirit of that book. And one thing I want to draw attention to here, in contrast to our previous hearings, is bringing the cannabis plant and making it more accessible into people's lives is going to increase understanding of what it is that we're talking about. And it's going to help with the sort of alienated misunderstanding of the plant versus some of the things that could be made from the plant versus things that can be synthesized that are similar to what's in the plant. We have a big project as a society to update our understanding of this plant. This is something that we've cultivated for thousands of years. It predates our experiments with government and money and a lot of other things that we take for granted as norms. And so it's time for us to move past prohibition into a new era of understanding what it is that we're talking about so that we can move forward with positive policy making that's going to improve outcomes for everybody. And this is definitely one of those bills. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we have Mr. Taylor Gardner and Ms. Taylor Gardner, apologies, and let's see, Mr. Bailey Hirschberg, and they will be followed by, let's see, Ms. Linda Thompson and Mr. Eric Johnston.
Well, good morning, committee members. My name is Taylor Gardner. I'm the Deputy Policy Director for the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, here to testify opposed to House Bill 1614. Generally speaking, our members do not agree with the proposal of permitting home grow and would prefer the state maintain its commitment pursuant to Initiative 502 that this industry remain in a well-regulated commercial setting that was just cited to repeatedly in the previous two bill discussions. We just don't believe this policy will make Washingtonians safer, though we appreciate the thoughtful considerations put into protecting the process. Unfortunately, as I'm sure this committee is aware, public safety threats plague cannabis retailers in this state, and we surely don't like the idea that those threats and crimes could follow people back to their homes. However, if this committee and the legislature are going to consider permitting home grow, we'd like to offer some feedback that may strengthen those protections. First, I would like to draw your attention to page 6 in line 1, where the bill language actually plainly states that it is not mandating how or where homegrown cannabis must be stored. We encourage the legislature to make that call. Tell people exactly what they need to do in order to avoid that liability that was on the table and just discussed. I would even recommend that the committee consider looking to Nevada for language. It clearly states that it must be in an enclosed area with a lock or security device. If that's something the committee would like to consider, I'd like to offer that to them. As a quick second point, while it's not directly addressed in this bill, I'd like to recommend the committee consider another element from Nevada law, which we believe would help provide a balance to the discussion about access to cannabis while also recognizing the public safety threats we know exist. And just to be very brief, I'll wrap up very soon. Nevada has a limitation on that Homegrow is allowed only when somebody does not live within a 25-mile radius of a cannabis retailer. Now, while I understand the geography and population density are different, what they do here is they're deterring people from home growing when they have access to that highly regulated, safe commercial retail. So we think that that may be another provision
Thank you
to
for your
balance.
testimony. We have
Thank
a
you.
lot of people waiting.
My name is Bailey Hirschberg. I'm a member of Washington Normal. I'm also the consumer advisor or consumer representative on the Cannabis Advisory Council. I write for Cannabis Observer, and I was a volunteer organizer on the original I-502 campaign. We took a lot of flack during that campaign because of the lack of home grow. It was one of the things I heard the public complain about the most, surprisingly enough. So this is obviously something that we fully support, and no, my notes. This bill reminds me a lot of I-502 in the sense that it's more restrictive than I think is okay, but maybe that means it's more, palatable or more acceptable to the legislature. The reality is that we have a market where we don't want to encourage big cannabis, but at the same time, we don't want people to grow their own. That seems like a kind of weird series of priorities to me. And I'm also want to suggest a specific change based on the gun safety law. It includes an exception where adults are allowed to access firearms with a child if they're supervising that child. It seems very weird to me that that wasn't included in this cannabis cultivation bill. It seems like we're missing an opportunity for education, for discussions about health and safety related to the gardening of this by being overly strenuous about wanting to keep it away. So I would encourage passage of this bill. I would encourage a minor revision in that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Next.
All right, Madam Chair, thank you. Remotely, we have Ms. Linda Thompson and Mr. Eric Johnson, and they will be followed by remotely Mr. Jim McRae, and then the last two witnesses will be in person.
This is Linda Thompson. I'm with the Washington Association for Substance Abuse and Violence Prevention. We are opposed to this bill, and we ask that you do not allow home grows in our state. We are looking at youth access. We are looking at how to keep our community safe. We want this system to work. When I-502 passed, it was passed by just over a slight majority of our community, and we voted to have a regulated system. As we hear from the industry that they think it's important to have publication and public education and prevention, and yet we are seeing bills that would expand the cannabis market, delivery regulations, even a bill to eliminate the regulations on signage and billboards. That helps us to make sure our youth are aware of what's happening around the marijuana industry. We want to make sure we have prevention. We have 120 community prevention wellness initiatives, coalitions in this state. We have 280 cities and towns. Invest in prevention. Please help us by not allowing home grows. We cannot keep up with the prevention work we need to do because the initiative did include prevention, but that has been moved to other places, and we continue to struggle to keep up with this industry request to expand the industry. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. And so we have, Mr. Arthur West, Mr. Don Skakey, and Mr. Brandon Bond, if you could all come up. And that's the final panel.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stearns.
Go ahead.
Please begin.
Good morning, Madam Co-Chairs and sponsors of this bill. Thank you very much for proposing this bill. I also thank you for having it on Groundhog Day, because like Groundhog Day, the movie, I keep waking up and marijuana is still illegal. After 10 years, after 502 got passed, it's still illegal to grow marijuana in your house. They can still seize your house for growing a plant. I don't think that's correct. When 502 was passed, they said, well, this is just temporary and we're going to fix it. We're going to go back to it and fix the rest of it later. Well, It's high time to fix it, and I hope that this bill passes, but I'm very concerned there doesn't seem to be a companion bill in the Senate. So I'm just hoping that the legislature doesn't see its shadow and run back to its offices and leave us for another decade of bad marijuana policy. And I'll just keep waking up, hearing Sonny and Cher on the radio, and knowing that marijuana's still illegal for another 10 years. Thank you very much.
Please proceed.
Oh, Madam Co-Chair, my name is Brandon Bond from Seattle. As far as the Homegrow situation, you could look at like how they did craft brew back in the 80s and 90s. People were brewing at home, wasn't really much of an issue. But what ended up happening was that craft brew grew through the 90s, which created its own industry in a sense. It promoted that industry, which ultimately led to the hops industry being one of the best in Washington. So when you look at it, as far as Homegrow, it doesn't really affect anything besides it allows the person to grow for their personal use. But one of the biggest things that'll always stick out is commercial farms won't grow low-yielding plants that people use for medicine. So you have to allow at least the access for them to grow something that a commercial farm wouldn't grow. Thank you.
Thank you. Next testifier.
Good morning, chairs and committee members, and I want to thank everyone who sponsored and co-sponsored this important legislation. It's been well said that this is long past due, should have been a part of the original reform, but here we are. I think that the bill as written, we should all support. The only question and concern that I have really is in section 2, is about the community endangerment language. I don't know why people call me, they don't call me ever. The community endangerment language, if you look to the added language and to the current language right above it, the maximum penalty for the firearms would be $500, but the amount of the penalty for homegrown cannabis would be $750. Now, I am hard-pressed to believe that cannabis is more dangerous to youth access than firearms would be. I would ask that if we're going to amend anything, that penalty should be amended down below the firearm penalty. And the penalty actually needs to fall on the perpetrator, not the home grower. Nobody wants anybody coming into their home for any reason to take their stuff. And I think I'll follow up with the written testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony. We have one more witness, my mea culpa, Mr. Jim McRae, who is testifying remotely.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chair, members of the committee. This is Dr. James McRae. I want to talk about this in the context of harm reduction and normalization. You know, we're a society that's familiar with alcohol and nicotine. And, you know, about 50 years ago, when I started entering my teens, you know, I saw people around me using the things that were out there. And I, you know, as I did, tended to do a little research at the time. That was before the internet. And, you know, I came to the conclusion based on that of the things that were commonly used by my peers and friends, cannabis was the safest. You know, people were not getting too drunk and vomiting and aspirating on their vomit and dying, as in alcohol. Lung cancer didn't seem to be elevated in smokers. That, you know, was not well covered at the time. Subsequently, data kind of support that. So, you know, I looked at it as something as the least harmful of the options available to us. So, in that context, I wondered why it was illegal. So we're in a state now almost 10 years into legality, and I can make beer in my home. I believe I can grow nicotine and tobacco, although I don't think it would work very well in this state. But I can't grow cannabis. You know, and as I read the laws on hemp, I think I can grow hemp. You know, so not commercially, I would have to get a license for that, but, it's ridiculous. And if you want to get people into a more normalized view of what cannabis is, it would be very helpful if they could see the plant, if they could touch it, if they could smell it.
Thank you. Your time
if
is up.
neighbors had it, people they know,
Your
people they know
testimony.
and trust. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I will follow up with written testimony on this and the cannabinoid bills. Thank you.
Madam Chair, to wrap up on HB 1614, there were 15 witnesses signed in, of which we had 15 pro and there were 3 witnesses signed in as con. And not testifying, there were 83 witnesses signed in as pro and 16 witnesses signed in as con.
Thank you for that summary. With that, the public hearing on 1614 is now closed.